Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for the kind introduction, and really thank you for the organization of this beautiful conference. I'm going to speak about the Hungarian situation. However, if we compare the situation, the circumstances of Hungary with the other European countries, we will see the real similarities with those countries. Before we dive into our topic, we must examine the title itself. In canonical tradition, the word irregularity or impediment, in other sphere of the canon, carries a specific technical meaning. In strict sense, it refers to irregularities and impediments, those legal circumstances which under canon law render a person incapable of contracting a valid marriage. Canon 1073 defines a diriment impediment which renders a person unqualified to contract marriage validly. These are not, first of all, pastoral categories. They are juridical ones, precise, enumerated, and governed by strict principles. When we speak today about the irregular unions, we are not for the most part speaking of impediments in strict canonical sense. We are speaking of much broader pastoral reality. Couples who live outside the full canonical and sacramental framework of marriage for a wide variety of reasons. The term is pastorally useful, but it is canonically imprecise. I think this is a huge problem that sometimes we are using expressions in our pastoral life, in daily life, but canonically these expressions are imprecise. From strict canonical perspective, this term is highly problematic, irregular union. It is an umbrella term that blurs fundamental legal and theological differences. Canon law does not treat all irregular unions in the same way. The bond is a relationship, an ontological reality that exists in the interpersonal sphere of human spirit. We have to say that first, a bond of love arising from mutual self-giving, morally binding in itself. The second, the bond of law, arising from the public lawful manifested consent. It adds a legal dimension. The third, the bond of sacrament, arising when the marriage is between two baptized believers. It elevates the union into kingdom mystery, a sign and instrument of grace of God. In a simple cohabitation, none of these three bonds are formally established. The couple may love each other deeply, but love alone, and this is important for our practice of our tribunals, the love alone, without public commitment, does not constitute a consortium of the whole life. A canon 1055 defines marriage. When couples bypass this formal exchange of consent, they lack the institutional framework that transforms a private relationship, I think this is important, into a consortium. They lack what the law requires and they lack what the sacrament offers. Although my focus remains on the Hungarian reality, the canonical principles and the social phenomena we face are largely the same across Europe. When we examine universal teaching of the Church, particularly Pope Francis, Amoris Laetitia, we find pastoral framework for what the Church calls irregular situations. The exhortation primarily addresses three classic categories. First, simple cohabitation, where couples live together without any formal bond. Second, purely civil marriage, of course, in the case of the Catholics. And the third, the divorced and civilly remarried. Crucially, in the last case, the previous canonical marriage is recognized as a valid and the bond remains binding. It creates a profound theological and juridical dilemma when a subsequent civil union is entered. The answer to each of these questions changes everything, canonically, theologically, and pastorally. And yet, in the everyday parish life, all of these situations are often lumped together under the label of irregular unions. Let me start with the simple cohabitation. From the strict canonical perspective, simple cohabitation represents a relationship devoid of both the legal and the sacramental bond. In the Catholic tradition, a valid marriage arises from the lawful manifest of consent of parties. This mutual consent creates an ontological reality, a relationship and bond that is perpetual and exclusive by its very nature. Historically, the Church intervention in marriage shifted from strict juridical regulation to the pastoral guidance, or vice versa. It depends on the authors. It particularly emphasizes the consent is the efficient cause of marriage. When couples bypass this formal exchange of consent, they lack the institutional framework that transforms a private relationship into a consortium of the whole life. Pope Francis embraces a vital distinction in Amoris Laetitia. And I think this differentiation is very vital from the side of the Pope, that he strictly differentiated between the cohabitation, which totally excludes any intention to marry in the future, and the cohabitation driven by cultural and contingent situation. For nuptial cohabitors, living together is often not motivated by rejection of sacramental union, but by economic or social constraints. I think we have to take into consideration the real situation of the people who are living in our places. The church responses, therefore, cannot be only juridical. It must be pastoral, if you like, practical, attending to the whole person in the whole context. Before we judge, we must look at the sociological reality. We were talking about a lot about the importance of the other sciences, such as the sociology, when we are analyzing the situation from canonical perspective. Why do couples choose to cohabit today? Demographic research from Max Planck Institute and the Eurostat data show a clear trend. You can see that this illustration on the slide. In Europe, marriage has increasingly become a luxury. Young people face insecure jobs, inflation, and severe housing crisis. For many cohabitors, living together is not motivated by rejection of sacramental union or any union. Rather, it is driven by economic and social constraints. They postpone marriage because the financial threshold is too high. Sociological research confirms this economic reality. Marriage is increasingly viewed as a status symbol rather than starting point in life. Research by Vanier Institute of the Family, according to them, a traditional wedding has become a very costly affair. This is the reality in our own societies. Financial security, many young couples feel they must achieve complete financial security before they can even consider marriage. They wait until they finish their education, secure a stable job, and save enough money for home. The essential properties of marriage are unity and indissolubility. The internal goods of the bond are the spouses, bonum conjugum, and the procreation and education of children, bonum prois. These canonical pillars are not essentially based on material wealth or financial assets. However, Christians and Catholics today live in a highly materialistic environment. Therefore, pastors must not simply relativize or ignore financial questions and difficulties. The jurisprudence of Hungarian ecclesiastical tribunals clearly reflects this economic pressure. In marriage nullity case, it is an experience that relationships mostly do not break down due to the ideological rebellion. Instead, they fail due to the overwork. Couples work too much to make a living. They have no time for each other because they must secure the financial conditions. Rigid application of the law alone does not answer the real existential crisis of the faithful. Pastoral work does not end within the walls of the church. The social teaching of the church must speak out clearly on these issues. The church must use its institutional influence to protect families. State lawmakers must be encouraged, or the Catholic or the Christian lawmakers, of course, to pursue realistic and effective family policies. There is a critical need for housing support, youth accommodation programs, and accessible scholarships. A student loan lasting for decades, for example, can reduce a young person's desire to marry and have children. Although social policy does not seem like a direct pastoral task, but it is. The sociological reality in Hungary is particularly alarming. According to the 2025 report by Habitat for Humanity, the housing crisis deepening in the country. You can see the illustration here on the slide that how the situation changed over the decades. Currently, nearly 2.9 million people are affected by housing poverty. Over the past 15 years, housing prices in Hungary have grown the most drastically within the entire European Union. But I know that the other European Union member countries, the housing is not a cheap issue. Meanwhile, average wages have completely failed to keep pace with this price increase. Unfortunately, current Hungarian housing policies further increase the social inequalities. 95% of the planned state housing expenditures do not have those in need, but rather those with higher incomes. Due to high prices, even the middle class is finding it increasingly difficult to have home. The socially needy are completely excluded from sustainable housing solution. According to the professional organizations, this problem cannot be solved without a strong state and non-profit rental housing sector. If young people cannot access adequate housing, it will remain a severe social problem spanning generations. It is the prophetic mission of the Catholic Church to advocate for housing because creating existential security is a fundamental condition for the foundation of stable marriage and family. Furthermore, this is a typical block houses in the post-Soviet area. Just for the illustration, even these kind of houses are extremely expensive in the Central European countries. According to professional organizations, furthermore, in Hungary, we see another fascinating paradox. Data from Hungarian Central Statistical Office showed a massive spike in marriages in the last decades. But we must read this data carefully. The Hungarian state offered significant financial help, such as housing subsidies and family loans that are strictly tied to the civil marriage and the legal promise to have children. You can imagine this situation. That consequently, many couples marry in civil ceremonies out of economic necessity. They skip the sacramental wedding because in Hungary, a canonical marriage has no civil legal relevance. They receive the state funding without it, of course. But what happens if these couples do decide to have church wedding? According to the canon 1060, the church always presumes a marriage is valid. But we must examine the intention closely. If a couple primarily wants to secure a state financial support rather than enter a true lifelong marital covenant, we face the issue of simulation. According to the canon 1101, if a positive act of the will excludes marriage itself, it is invalid from the very beginning. Many couples later find themselves trapped in broken or even toxic relationship. They cannot afford to divorce civilly because doing so triggers a brutal financial penalty. The immediate repayment of the state subsidies with heavy interest. Actually, they have to repay the money for the state. This reality creates a profound canonical problem. In Hungary, ecclesiastical tribunals typically refuse to open nullity case until a civil divorce is finalized. By doing this, the church authorities aim to avoid a situation in which a person becomes canonically free to marry but remains bound by civil law. It was mentioned one of the presentations, if I remember yesterday. This policy exists to respect the canon 1071, which forbids priests from assisting at a marriage that cannot be recognized by civil law. We foresee a significant increase in nullity cases arising specifically from this category of simulation. This will be a new category of simulation, actually. Couples who never truly intend to marry but enter into both civil and canonical unions merely for subsidies will end up before our tribunals sooner or later. This is not a classic irregular situation, dear colleagues. Rather, it creates a highly unique landscape of putative or invalid marriage. In this challenge, providing pastoral care for those broken families is essential. There is an urgent need for the Episcopal Conference and the Church as a whole to step up with clear, robust teaching on the true essence of marriage, protecting the sacrament from becoming more economic tool. Ironically, this canonical danger would be much worse in countries where a church wedding automatically grants civil legal recognition, such as in Slovakia, Italy, and Poland, and in Croatia, if I'm not mistaken. Fortunately, I emphasize fortunately, Hungary does not have this system. Civil marriage is strictly separated from the canonical recognized marriages. Although granting state recognition to church wedding has been debated in the past. Actually, after the regime change, they debated about the recognition of the church marriage in the civil forum. The current situation, dear colleagues, prevents the altar from becoming a stepping stone for state financial gain. In fact, this is a perfect example of what Pope Benedict XVI called healthy secularity, or a positive secularism. It rightly separated the two institutions in these highly delicate matters. Furthermore, this is exactly where Amoris Laetitia invokes the law of gradualness. It acknowledges that human beings accomplish moral good by stages of growth. Our pastoral approach must recognize that these couples are just trying to survive in a harsh economic reality, the current circumstances. They are not necessarily rebelling against the church teaching. The solution lies in a radical renewal of both remote and proximate marriage preparation. This educational process cannot be limited to the weeks leading up to the wedding. Okay, thank you. The preparation must deeply embedded in the context of the sacraments of Christian initiation. One of our first presentations emphasized very various today the importance of this long-term preparation. A pastoral care must provide a practical guidance to young people. It must teach them how to protect their marital unity and family life later from the pressure of the modern consumer society. Canon 1063 calls on pastors as well to prepare the faithful for marriage, though preaching, catechesis, and personal accompaniment. This is the remote preparation for marriage as a pastoral instrument. The Hungarian Catholic Bishop Conference, its Family Affairs Committee, has been actively promoting a new model. It is called catechumenal preparation for marriage. This model was championed by Pope Francis himself. In 2022, the Dicastery for Laity, Family and the Life published a document specifically to help parishes implement this approach. Bishop of Vác, you can see him on the slide. Vác is a city near Budapest, approximately 50 kilometers from Budapest. That the Bishop Conference, if Joel Martin, family affairs delegate, said that preparing for priesthood for religious life needs 5 or 6 years of preparation because it is a lifelong commitment. Then why do we settle for a few sessions for marriage? It is a pastoral challenge. The catechumenal style is not a primarily method, it is an attitude, according to Bishop Martin, a way of evangelization. The document 2022 continued accompaniment for 2 or 3 years after the marriage as well, because the first years of marriage are often the most challenging. In Hungary, this model is being implemented in the concrete ways. The Families is Jesus Community, this is an organization, is working in Hungary in many dioceses. They have 3 types of programs for engaged couples. First, the group accompaniment, the second, the personalized accompaniment, and so the full weekend retreat. Every year, around February 14, the Franciscan parish in Budapest holds a special Valentine Days Mass for couples. The homily focuses on love and partnership. At the end, the couples bless each other and pray for one another. These are not grand institutional programs. They are small, human, concrete gestures. But they are exactly what Amoris Laetitia calls for. Francis writes, in the cohabiting couples need to be welcomed and guided patiently and discreetly. It does not begin with the condemnation. It begins with the welcome, with accompaniment, with the conviction that God puts more into our relationship than we ourselves put into it. Now, let me turn to the next major category of irregular situation, the civil marriage or non-Catholic rite. After the Reformation in Hungary, the country became a religiously divided country. Catholics, Calvinists, and Lutherans lived side by side. This created an immediate legal problem. From 1791 onwards, 2 separate legal systems governed marriage in Hungary. Church law, which was applied, of course, to the Catholics, and the state law, which was applied to the Protestants and to everyone. This was not a theoretical distinction. It had real consequences. A mixed marriage, and here you can see the religious map of Hungary, both Hungaries. This is the historical one on the first map, and this is the current territory of Hungary, and you can compare the religious affiliation in the country in the 2 situations. The mixed marriage between Catholics and Protestants could be considered indissoluble for one spouse and dissoluble for another. The same marriage, 2 different legal realities, and the situation was even more complex. Hungary had not 1, not 2, but 8 different confessional marriage laws, and they were operating simultaneously. Catholics, Calvinists, Lutherans, Unitarians, this is a special community in Transylvania. Currently, this territory belongs to Romania. Orthodox and Jews each had their own rules. And within some confessions, the rules differed by region. As the ministerial explanation of the 1894, the minister said that the administration of justice was simply impossible under such a fragmented system. Mixed marriage were the central pastoral and canonical problem in the 19th and beginning of the 20th centuries Hungary. The church required guarantees. Before dispensation could be granted, the non-Catholic spouse had to promise in writing not to interfere with the Catholic partner's faith, and that all children would be raised Catholic. Actually, this classic regulation, Hungarian local regulation, harmonizes with the current one, mostly harmonizes with the current legal situation, legal regulation. In practice, however, Hungarian parish priests often blast the mixed marriages without these guarantees, a fitting illustration of the old saying, leges Romani constituuntur, Germaniae servantur, Hungariae non valent. Now we are in Germany. That laws are made in Rome, kept in Germany, and not apply in Hungary. It was a pastoral pragmatism at that time. It was a pastoral pragmatism in a religiously plural society, and we are talking about the 19th century. But Rome was not satisfied, of course. In 1830, Pope Pius VIII issued a brief making clear that the Catholic who enters a mixed marriage without proper guarantees sins against natural and divine law. The Hungarian bishops took a firm stand. Bishop Lajcsák of Nagyvárad is a city in the part of in Romania now, instructed his priest, if the guarantees cannot be obtained, don't perform the wedding in the church. The instruction was clear, said that, hear the vows in the sacristy, wear no vestments, and perform no ceremony. This caused a public scandal. The matter went all the way to Rome. In 1841, Pope Gregory XVI issued a brief Quas Vestro. The conclusion was remarkable. Mixed marriages contracted in Hungary without the Tridentine form were to be considered valid, though illicit. Hungary received a special exception from the universal law of the Church. The conflict did not end there. In 1968, the Hungarian parliament passed a law stating that in mixed marriages, sons follow the father's religion, daughters follow the mother's. This is an illustration for this. Any private agreement to the contrary was declared legally void. This directly contradicted the church requirement that all children be raised Catholic. In 1918, the Minister of Education issued a decree. Any priest who baptized a child belonging to another denomination by law had to forward the baptismal certificate to the competent minister of the denomination. The bishop, of course, refused to comply. Pope Leo XIII convened a special commission. The conclusion? The decree must not to be obeyed. This conflict, known in Hungary, a history as or the baptism war, lasted 4 years. It was only resolved by the great ecclesiastical reform of 1894. From that point on, a marriage was legally valid only if contracted before a civil register. This is the end of the 19th century. The church retained the right to celebrate the sacrament, but the sacrament no longer had severe legal effect on its own. This created a new category of irregular union, Catholics who married only civilly, without canonical form. And the law itself, interestingly, this is interesting because the law itself acknowledged this situation. The civil register was required by law to remind the couple at the ceremony by contracting, saying that here's the illustration, by contracting marriage before me, you have not yet fulfilled your religious obligations. This was a remarkable sentence. The state itself, that time, the end of the 19th century until the end of the Second World War, the state itself acknowledged the distinction between civil and sacramental marriage. How did the Catholic Church in Hungary react to those who bypassed actually the canonical form? The response was heavily disciplinary. And I think this is a huge difference, the current pastoral attitude and the attitude of the historical approach. The response was heavily disciplinary. It focused on canonical penalties rather than pastoral accompaniment. This is a huge difference between our attitudes. If the Catholic married before the Protestant minister, the penalty was severe. According to the decrees of the Holy See and then the previous Code of Canon Law, the Catholic party incurred excommunication. If Catholics contracted only a civil marriage, the Church declared the union entirely invalid. The Hungarian Catholic Bishop Conference issued a strict joint pastoral letter in 1894, right before the civil marriage law took effect. According to this document, couples living in purely civil marriage were publicly categorized as public sinners, publici peccatores. The practical consequences were harsh and immediate. These individuals were denied absolution and Holy Communion. They were banned from joining church associations. They were strictly forbidden from acting as godparents or even as witness of the Catholic weddings. Furthermore, women in such situation, such unions were denied the traditional postpartum blessing. If they died without repentance, they were denied an ecclesiastical burial. As the prominent Hungarian canon lawyer or canonist István Sipos, now we celebrated the anniversary of his birth, wrote several marriage law books as well in Latin. And Laszlo Gálos stated in their authoritative textbook, these couples were branded with factual infamy, infamia facti. The church punished them for openly burning laws and sacraments. This strict penalty-driven approach defined the Hungarian pastoral reality for decades, long before the more accommodating pastoral shift of the Second Vatican Council. Hungarian canon law also recognized a special institution, the matrimonium conscientiae, the conscience marriage. This was a marriage contracted in secret, with the bishop's permission, without public announcement. It was used in a case of serious and urgent need to protect the reputation of the parties or legitimize the children, while avoiding the public scandal. The records were kept in sealed register at the bishop's office, separate from the parish books. The institution shows us the church has always, not only now, recognized that not every irregular situation can be resolved publicly and immediately. Pastoral discretion has deep canonical roots. The most dramatic rupture in Hungary and Catholic marriage practice came into the 20th century, of course. After the 1948, the communist regime systematically dismantled the religious life. Church weddings were actively discouraged under the communist regime. In some periods and professions, for instance, who were working for the law enforcement or the military or for the public administration and so on and so on, in some periods and professions, they were effectively prohibited. A whole generation of Catholics married only civilly. They did this not out of indifference to the sacrament, but out of the fear of the livelihoods and the families. Decades later, many of these couples sought to regularize their marriage. The church had the canonical tools ready for this, the well-known simple convalidation and the radical sanation, convalidatio simplex and the sanatio radica. Of course, now we don't have time to analyze the two situations. However, it was extremely interesting how the Catholic Church, after the communist system, applied the two solutions for the previous marriages. However, applying these canonical tools created a complex dual pastoral, not only canonical, pastoral task. First, pastors had to provide sensitive sacramental preparation for couples who had hidden their faith for decades. Second, they had to explain this integration to the wider parish community. Pastors had to clearly teach that the door of conversion is always open, even to those who previously did not practice their faith. The dynamic caused a significant social tension in Hungary in the years following the regime change. The faithful who had suffered and remained loyal to the church during the persecution now had to welcome back those who had compromised. This is the typical situation when we say that the history repeats itself, because this was the situation in the ancient church, early church itself. The regularization of these marriages was not just a canonical procedure, it was a profound process of community, healing, and reconciliation. Moreover, the communist regime made formal marriage preparation almost impossible. That where the official church could not reach, more communities stepped in private homes, in hiking trips in the hills of urban Budapest, in quiet conversation, in confessionals, groups like the Bokor community, founded by Father György Bulányi and the Regnum Marianum movement, gathered young people, including engaged couples, in secret. Here, for the first picture, you can see the Bulányi, who established a Bokor community, which was a secret Catholic community in the years of the communism, actually not recognized either from the side of the Catholic Church, of official Catholic Church. These were not formal marriage preparation causes, but they were something perhaps more powerful. They were communities of faith, where young people learned what Christian marriage meant, not from textbook, but from living witnesses. That in Hungary, at the same time, the Universal Church was developing its teaching on marriage and family. In 1968, Pope Paul VI issued the Humanae Vitae in the middle of the Cold War. The Church reaffirmed the inseparable connection between love, life, and marriage. In Hungary, this document could not be freely distributed, but it circulated quietly, hand to hand. In 1979, Pope John Paul II himself, from behind the Iron Curtain, issued the Catechesi Tradendae. And in 1981, he gave the Church its most comprehensive document of marriage and family, Familiaris Consortio. It spoke directly about couples living in irregular unions. It called for pastoral accompaniment, not condemnation. It said clearly, the Church must distinguish between those who have sincerely tried and failed and those who have simply never been reached by the gospel of marriage. It introduced the concept of gradual growth, the idea that pastoral care is a journey, not a single moment of judgment. And it called for serious, structured marriage preparation, remote, proximate, and immediate, as a fundamental pastoral priority. Without the church, this is a historical route which demonstrate that the preparation is not only a theological and canonical issue, but a pastoral question at the same time. But the key issues, the key questions were answered: no condemnation, no indifferences, but patient, persistent pastoral accompaniment. And now let me turn to the next category, the group of divorced and remarried. Currently, there is often a significant gap between official church teaching and the private pastoral practice regarding divorce and remarriage. Historically, critics have argued that the church approach was overly juridical. The strict legalism failed to incorporate the findings of psychology regarding the actual death of a relationship. Maintaining the split between the public doctrine and the pastoral practice often compounds a person's sense of guilt rather than healing it. Pope Francis addressed this tension in Amoris Laetitia. The document shifts the focus from rigid legal categories to pastoral discernment. It recognizes that objective canonical irregularity does not always mean a subjective moral sin. The Church must accompany the divorced and civilly remarried. Pastors are called to evaluate each couple in internal forum. Church tribunals perform a crucial duty of mercy by determining the objective validity of the marital consent. However, a plural legal declaration of nullity is insufficient for the human healing. A canonical annulment does not automatically erase the traumatic experiences, pain, and the emotional wounds left by the broken relationship. Therefore, the legal marriage annulment process should be accompanied by the comprehensive pastoral support program, which is, I know it is very difficult because you have to harmonize the work of the tribunal with the pastoral attitude, and you have to invite other experts to the tribunal works. The diocesan tribunal performs one of the most sensitive pastoral ministries in the church. According to the Instruction Dignitas Connubii, the judicial process must never be reduced to a cold, bureaucratic procedure. Pope Leo XIV recently reminded the Roman Rota that the judges are called to safeguard the truth with rigor but without rigidity, and to exercise charity without omission. Crucially, this pastoral sensitivity must remain absolute regardless of the final verdict, even if the tribunal ultimately determines that the marriage is valid, meaning the declaration of nullity cannot be granted. The process itself must be pastoral and cantor. Tribunal staff must handle the couple's pain with deep empathy. The faithful accept the truth of their bond, ensuring they never fell abandoned by the church. Regarding the historical perspective of the pastoral care of divorced and eventually remarried at the civil forum in Hungary, I will like to quote that Justice Minister Dezső Szilágyi, who argued that the divorce and remarriage, in occasion of the divorce and remarriage, if the community is already broken, why forbid a new beginning? What happened next? In the early 1990s, approximately 150,000 marriages were contracted each year in historical Hungary. The number of divorces was between 3,500 and between 3,800 per year. That is roughly 2 or 3%. A decade after the introduction of divorce, only 2 or 3 marriages in 100 were dissolved. This is not a huge number. This was not a social revolution. It was a legal change that ran ahead of social reality. But the trend was set in motion. By early 1930s, the divorce rate had risen to 6-7%. By 1948, 12%. As István Szabó, professor of the Pázmány Péter Catholic University, has observed, the removal of legal prohibition does not merely permit a behavior. It changes the moral perception of that behavior. What was once forbidden begins to feel morally optional. If we look solely the number at the rate of divorces since the fall of communism, we see a remarkably stable trend. During the 1990s and 2000, the number of divorces remained constantly high, peaking around 25,000 per year. Although a slow, slight decline has begun over the past decade, the figures currently stagnate around 16 and 90,000. In 1999, the bishops issued a pastoral letter addressed to all people of goodwill for happier families. This is the dust jacket of the document, which was published by the Hungarian Episcopal Conference. They also addressed the divorced and civilly remarried directly, and the example is coming from the mentioned Familiaris Consortium. Canonically, being an irregular situation does not mean, and I think this is very important, being outside the church. The divorced and civilly remarried remain members of the body of Christ. They remained baptized. They remained called to holiness. Canon 96 of the Code of Canon Law states, by the baptism, one is incorporated in the Church of Christ and is constituted a person in it. Canon 213 affirms, the Christian faithful have the right to receive assistance from the sacred pastors out of the spiritual goods of the church, especially the word of God and the sacraments. The right to word of God belongs to every baptized person. No irregular situation removes it. Familiaris Consortio 84, the foundation text, it is precise. John Paul II wrote, together with the synod, I earnestly call upon pastors and the whole community of the faithful to have the divorced, and with the care to make sure that they do not consider themselves as separated from the church. They are to be encouraged to listen to the word of God, attend the Mass, preserve in prayer, contribute to works of charity. This is, I think, extremely important in our day, that the charity, importance of the charitative work in the church, raise the children in the Christian faith. They are the heart of the Christian life. Amoris Laetitia deepens this. They should not feel excommunicated, but rather they should be able to live and mature as living members of the church. Full communion, imperfect participation, but real belonging. Now we are running out of the time. Just I don't have time to explain the real situation in Transylvania in the Hungarian-speaking community, but you will be able to read about the stories in the publication, because we published this article, and a certain Hungarian situation about the Emmanuel community, which is a community in Budapest, Hungary, which particularly takes a lot for this kind of couples. They organize a lot of events for them. I conclude, I summarize my my presentation, and after we will have opportunity to hold the questions and answer. That in my presentation, I try to examine one of the urgent pastoral challenges facing the church in Hungary today, the care of families living in irregular situation. I began with the canonical question, what exactly is irregular union? Because an unclear, the undefined issue, terminology. The term is used loosely: simple cohabitation, civil marriages with canonical form, and divorce followed by civil remarriage. I reflected to this, the last part of my presentation. The church is called to handle the different pastoral situation, of course, with different pastoral responses. We analyzed the sociological reality and emphasized the importance, the cooperation between the theology and pastoral activity, canon law, and the sociological reality. And we explored the paradox unique in Hungary, that state financial initiatives and financial support for the families, and the important role of the Catholic Church to tackle this problem, which simplifies the marriage as an economical aid from the part of the state. Thank you so much. Really, thank you for the attention, and I'm ready to answer your questions and observations.